Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. and Mrs. Social Studies. My name is Sarah and today we're talking about how to have a curriculum mid-year check-in. We're midway through the school year and this is an important time to reflect about how things are going and to see what sort of adjustments need to be made. And these are adjustments that can benefit you, they can benefit your students, and just the overall flow of your class the rest of the year. And I think this can be important for any subject, but with social studies in particular, or history, I guess, even more specifically, what we choose to cover and what we don't cover, or what skills we emphasize or don't emphasize, can have a big impact in students' lives and how they move forward. What historical events might be left out? What skills are going to be left out if we don't adjust and recalibrate midway through the year? So it's such an important thing to reflect about, and I've got some reflection questions today to help you assess where your plans currently lie and if there are some improvements that can be made. So let's jump in. The first question we must ask ourselves is, going at the current pace I am, where will I end up? What unit will I end with at the end of the year? And with this information, after you've reflected about it, you can decide, whether you're happy with that and you're on pace where you'd like to go, or if you are a little bit behind. I know myself, typically I was behind a little bit, and I use this as a chance to think, okay, how can I take some of these units and shorten them a bit so I can get to more present times? This was definitely something I would reflect about with my 8th grade history class. It was modern US history. And I found that sometimes I was on pace to only make it to World War II, which I do know is very common for 8th grade history teachers, but I knew that it was very important to me that we made it up to present times as much as possible so kids had some understanding of the world we were living in and more context about that. So what I did was shorten up some of the other units that I needed to get to and figured out what I could cut to allow myself to make it closer to present times. And of course, it's never going to be perfect. We've got one of those essential questions of breadth versus depth. How deep do I go to cover a topic versus do I kind of do more of a flyby and just cover the basics? It really depends upon you and your goals and the curriculum itself, but that is a key question here to understand where your pacing might be. And just because the textbook is laid out a certain way doesn't mean you have to follow it to a T and include all the sections. Sometimes the sections just feel a little bit, dense, and there's a lot of extra information that might not be as important as some of those units down the road. Another key question to reflect about is, are the essential skills that I want to cover being covered? In the past, I did a video talking about essential skills, which I will leave linked below if you wanted to check that out. But with that, there's a lot of different types of skills we can think about, and we really can't do it all. We have to pick and choose what kind of skills we focus on with our students. If you prioritize using DBQs and a lot of primary source work with your students, that's awesome. You'll probably need to spend a lot of time doing that and working on that skill, and in doing so, you might not be covering other skills, but that's okay as long as that's where your priorities are, or maybe that's where your district's priorities are. To get a better idea of the types of skills you focused on with your students, take a quick look over your past plans of what you've taught so far, either just recently or even the whole year if you want, and maybe jot down a list of the types of things that your students were doing. Maybe it was primary source analysis. Maybe it was communication in the sense of debate or discussion. Maybe it's been a lot of tech-related skills, especially in times of a lot of virtual learning or remote teaching. Look at what types of skills are being covered and see if there's any gaps that you want to try to fill in the second half of the school year, or things that you want to scale back on a little bit because you think your kids are getting the main idea. Again, there's no right answers here. We have so much flexibility, but this is where you can reflect about how these actions fit in with what your goal is for your students. This can also be a great time to reflect about, is the time in your class being used effectively? Are you using a warm-up? Does that warm-up or bell work or whatever it is help your students either build community, help them feel welcomed in your class, review course content? Does it have a clear purpose? If not, Could you reduce your time spent doing that or make some adjustments? Are some of the bigger activities you're doing with your students meaningful? If you're going to spend 4 or 5 days on a project, we obviously want it to be a positive experience, both for our students' overall enjoyment of the process as well as learning to get meaningful skills out of that activity. But not all activities are created equal. So to reflect about, is it worth the time to spend on these different things? It's also important to address, are the assessments meaningful? Every school or district is going to be different with how they view assessments and how assessments are used. But I know my personal teaching philosophy, as well as Mr. Social Studies, my husband's philosophy, is that we haven't chosen to use standard tests very regularly. I did use tests when I was teaching Spanish, but for social studies, we found that who cares if kids are memorizing information for a test? Is that going to really stick with them long term? Especially in the remote times, if kids are digital, are they just going to look up answers anyway? So is it even an accurate assessment? We have found that using projects and activities can be a much more meaningful opportunity for assessment. And if we shift away from tests or as many tests, that can actually open up class time, because I found that if I was doing a test, there'd be the test day itself, but then there'd also be probably one day at least dedicated to test review, where we'd go over a study guide or play a review game or Kahoot or Quizlet or something. If you think that you could scale back and maybe you don't have strict requirements in your district to do so, why not give it a try? Another key question to ask is what I'm teaching meaningful to my students? I was reflecting about this topic a little bit recently when I was looking over some of my old papers from middle school, and I was surprised and also not so surprised by some of what I found. It was a lot of just textbook worksheets in general, which I recycled because I don't personally find those to be very valuable or meaningful. And I also was surprised just by how there were certain just memorization things and a lot of just busy work and not really much high quality stuff. Now, certainly education has changed a lot since I was a student myself in middle school, but I think it can be so important for us to think from the perspective of our students. Is what we're doing with them meaningful? Are they actually learning? Are they engaged in your class? Are they going to remember what they're learning? Typically, engagement makes it more likely that students are going to actually learn. And if we can focus on making sure our lessons are engaging, of course, not every lesson is probably going to be engaging, but if we can shoot for that regularly, not only will kids have a better attitude being in our class and be more likely to learn, but what they do learn is more likely to stick, because it's those kind of moments where they remember them later. If students aren't really going to remember what we're teaching them, using the way that we're teaching them, it doesn't matter how much time we spend doing it, it's not working. So we can spend less time making more intentional decisions and shifting what we're doing to actually have a bigger impact. So I challenge you, if you are, let's say, kind of bored with what you're doing, or you've just been using, let's say, exclusively the textbook materials all year, maybe this is a great opportunity to try to throw in an engaging or skill-based activity. You might just find that you prefer teaching that way so much more, and I know for me, it's always a ton of fun. Finally, step 5 is what you're doing sustainable for you? There's plenty of different lists that give all sorts of awesome teaching tips, but the thing is, many of those different teaching tips are not sustainable for the teacher. You know what? There's a lot of really cool grading methods and really cool types of projects that sound awesome in theory until you actually reflect about the process of needing to grade that or the work that goes into setting something up like that. And quite frankly, it's just not worth it, and your time matters. Your work-life balance matters. So I encourage you to also check in to see how you're feeling. Now, unfortunately, due to this past school year and teaching during a pandemic and districts doing all sorts of things, it's very likely you're feeling worse about things than normal and more burned out than normal. And that is very much something we're seeing across the board in education. So with that in mind, I know we can't maybe dramatically shift things to make them better, but are there specific actions that you can take in your life to help you have better work-life balance or feel less burned out from what you're doing? If you haven't checked out last week's video, I did talk about different strategies you could use to leave work on time. Leaving work on time or not working as much outside of school hours can be a great way to help promote your own well-being, so that could be helpful. And within the school day, there are also actions that can be taken to help you feel better overall. If you feel like you don't have as much of a relationship with your students, maybe try to build that with some questions of the day to spark some good discussion and meaningful conversation the first few minutes of class. I'll leave a link below to the ones that we've used. If you're having trouble keeping up with grading, maybe you decide to grade with your students or set up some automatic grading systems like an automatic self-grading Google form. Maybe you focus on conferencing with students in breakout rooms or, one at a time to help discuss the grade and come up with a grade together as you're going through things so you're not as burned out from grading later. Maybe you build in some catch-up or check-in time, every other week, so that you're not necessarily covering new content those days, but you're allowing some time to just breathe for a bit. Maybe you look to collaborate with another teacher in your school or try out using a resource that's already made online for whatever subject so you don't feel like you have to create it all yourself. That's one of the biggest changes I wish I would have made my first year of teaching. I thought I had to do everything and create everything, and I wish I would have actually used Teachers Pay Teachers myself as a buyer more in that time, or just had a little bit more of a sense of worth that, you don't have to stay up till 2 a.m. creating resources every night. You can take it easy a little bit and find something else that's going to work. So definitely do what you can to support you with balance and finding balance in these tough times so that you're able to, take care of yourself and get through the rest of this school year and beyond. I hope you find these questions helpful as you reflect about your mid-year progress or checking in at this midway point. Keep up all the wonderful teaching. Your students are so lucky to have you. And if you are looking for some more social studies teacher content, I've got some videos over here that you can check out, and you can subscribe right up here. We'll see you next time. Bye.